night. But you clicked anyway. Now there's no turning back.
Title: Pages Written by Ghosts, Act I, The Blank Ledger. The rain in London didn't just fall, it clawed at the basement windows of Arthur Pendleton's workshop. The room smelled of decaying leather, ozone from the ultraviolet lamps, and the metallic tang of chemical solvents. Arthur adjusted his magnifying loupe. Before him sat a 17th century ledger bound in human skin and anthropodermic bibliopegy. It had been recovered from the boarded-up estate of Aleister Crowley's lesser-known contemporary, Elias Thorne. The strange thing wasn't the binding. In Arthur's line of work, the macabre was mundane. The strange thing was that the book was entirely, perfectly blank. 300 pages of immaculate, yellowed vellum. No ink. No indentations. Nothing. What were you hiding, Thorne? Arthur muttered, his voice swallowed by the heavy silence of the basement. He reached for a swab of ninhydrin, a chemical used to reveal latent prints or invisible organic inks. He brushed a thin layer across the top of the first page. He waited. 5 seconds. 10, then, the vellum began to weep. It wasn't revealing old ink. The words were forming in real time. Deep, visceral crimson bloomed from the fibers of the page, crawling like capillary veins until they formed jagged, frantic cursive. We have been waiting, Arthur. Arthur jerked his hand back, knocking over a vial of solvent. The glass shattered. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was a trick. A chemical reaction. A delayed oxidation process. His rational mind scrambled for purchase as he stared at the impossible sentence. He leaned in, his breath fogging the glass of his loupe. The second sentence bled into existence right below the first. The ink was wet. It was pooling. Your sister says it is cold down here. Arthur's blood turned to ice. Sarah. She had drowned in a frozen lake 20 years ago. He had been the one holding her hand when the ice broke. He had let go. ACT-2, The Unseen Scribes. By 2 a.m., the temperature in the workshop had plummeted. The heavy iron radiator hissed, but the air remained bone-chillingly frigid. Arthur hadn't moved from the stool. He was paralyzed, watching the book write itself. The scratching sound began around 2:15 a.m. SKRRK, SKRRK, SKRRK. It wasn't coming from the book. It was coming from the dark corners of the basement, just beyond the halo of his desk lamp. The sound of a dry quill violently tearing into parchment. Arthur grabbed a heavy brass letter opener. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The scratching stopped. The lone fluorescent bulb overhead flickered, buzzing violently before dying out completely. The only light left was the amber glow of the desk lamp. Arthur looked down. The left page of the ledger was now completely full. The handwriting had changed. It wasn't one author, it was dozens. The scripts overlapped, some elegant, some feral, some nothing more than desperate, bloody claw marks across the page. "Let us in, the dark is so heavy. Read it, Arthur. Read our truth. Sarah is choking, Arthur. She's still choking on the black water. Stop it." Arthur screamed, grabbing the book. He intended to hurl it into the incinerator at the back of the room. But as his fingers closed around the fleshy leather cover, a sudden, agonizing jolt shot up his arm. It felt like grabbing a live wire. He gasped, dropping the tome. It hit the floor and fell open to the middle. A new paragraph was writing itself, but the ink wasn't red anymore. It was a thick, viscous black sludge that smelled of rotting copper and stagnant water. "You cannot burn us. We are not the paper. We are the words. And we need a voice." Suddenly, Arthur felt a breath on the back of his neck. It was freezing, smelling of pond weed and ancient, stagnant decay. A voice, wet and gurgling, whispered directly into his ear, "Read, aloud." ACT-3, The Midnight Chorus. Arthur stumbled backward, crashing into a bookshelf. Heavy tomes rained down around him. He looked up, wide-eyed, his chest heaving. Standing over the desk were the authors, they were not ethereal, translucent ghosts. They were horrific, physical manifestations of agony. Tall, impossibly thin figures wrapped in tattered burial shrouds. Their faces were smooth, devoid of eyes or noses. Instead, they had gaping, vertical maws stained with black ink. Their fingers were elongated, ending in sharpened bones dipped in the dark sludge. One of them, smaller than the rest, stood at the front. It wore a rotting yellow raincoat. Sarah's raincoat. Arthur. The small figure gurgled. Black water spilled from its missing face. "You let me go." "No," Arthur sobbed, pressing himself against the brick wall. "No, I tried to pull you up. I tried." The tallest entity pointed a dripping, bony finger at the ledger on the floor. The book was furiously writing itself now, the pages flipping in a non-existent wind. The sound of 100 invisible quills filled the room, a deafening cacophony of scratching that threatened to shatter Arthur's eardrums. "Read." The word appeared on the wall behind the desk, written in a spray of arterial blood. "Read our pain. Give us breath." Arthur crawled toward the book. His forensic training, his logic, his entire worldview had completely fractured. He was a broken man, reduced to a weeping child under the crushing weight of supernatural grief. He looked at the open page. The words were a spell. An invocation written in a language that predated humanity, a phonetic rendering of absolute suffering. If I read it. Arthur choked out, looking at the entity in the yellow raincoat. "Will you let her go? Will she find peace?" The entity slowly nodded its faceless head. Arthur placed his trembling hands on the edges of the book. The leather felt warm now. Alive. Pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat, he took a deep breath and began to read. ACT-4, the vessel, in tenebris, clamomus. Arthur began, his voice shaking. As the first words left his lips, the temperature in the room plummeted further. Frost spiderwebbed across the windows. The entities surrounding him began to vibrate, emitting a low, guttural hum that vibrated in Arthur's teeth. Sanguis noster, atramentum tuum. Our blood, your ink. The black ink on the page began to lift. It didn't just sit on the paper, it rose into the air like smoke, slithering toward Arthur. It wrapped around his wrists, burning like dry ice. I opened the door, Arthur read, the ancient Latin automatically translating in his frantic mind. I offer the breath. I offer the flesh. He realized what he was reading. It wasn't a release for Sarah. It was an eviction notice for his own soul. He tried to stop. He clamped his jaw shut. But the entities lunged forward. Cold, wet, invisible hands forced his mouth open. The entity in the yellow raincoat stepped up onto the desk, leaning down until its dripping face was inches from his. Finish the page, brother, it whispered in a voice that was not Sarah's. It was a demonic, overlapping chorus of 1,000 drowned souls. Arthur, his eyes rolling back in his head, his vocal cords hijacked by an unseen force, screamed the final words, Ego sum liber. I am the book. The room exploded in blinding, dark energy. The black ink in the air rushed down Arthur's throat. He convulsed violently on the floor, clawing at his own neck as the thick, cold sludge filled his lungs, his veins, his mind. The entities dissolved, drawn into Arthur's thrashing body like a vacuum, and then, silence. The rain outside continued to beat against the glass. The amber desk lamp flickered back to life. Epilogue. The next chapter, the morning sun cast a pale, weak light into the basement workshop. Arthur Pendleton sat at his desk. His posture was perfect. Impeccable. He wore a calm, serene smile. He reached out and picked up a fresh, antique quill. He did not reach for an inkling. Instead, he calmly took the heavy brass letter opener and sliced a deep, horizontal line across his left forearm. He didn't flinch. He dipped the quill into his own pooling blood. Arthur's eyes were open, but there was no white left in them. They were pools of endless, moving black sludge. He was no longer Arthur Pendleton. He was an archive. He was the ledger. He pressed the blood-soaked quill to a fresh piece of vellum and began to write. His hand moving with mechanical, terrifying speed. We are alive, and we have so many stories left. T.O. Tell, who is reading this, the camera slowly pans out from Arthur's dark, smiling face, down to the paper, and then finally, out into the real world, waiting for the next reader. End of episode.
If you love stories that stay with you after midnight, subscribe. More darkness is coming. Now, there's no turning back.